We are less than a month away from the official launch of Joker's Wild. Season of the Drifter is on its way. We've got some huge changes coming to the Gambit game mode, and we even get to hear about some big buffs, and yes, indeed, even some big nerfs that are coming down the pipeline. All of that and more in this week's TWAB. What's going on, Guardians? My name is The Black Link, and we're going to be covering all of the biggest bits of information that have come out of this week's issue of the Bungie Weekly blog, This Week at Bungie, for the week of February 21st, 2019. Let's go ahead and dive on into it. Now, first things first, we've got ourselves a Bungie raid-along starting on Tuesday, February 26, 2019. From 10 a.m. Pacific to 12 p.m. Pacific, they're going to be running the Scourge of the Past raid. If you've ever wanted to know what it's like to build a raid from the ground up, this will of course be your chance to get a peek behind the curtains there at Bungie. They usually have some of the raid team there talking about design inspiration, what they were thinking of when they made certain encounters. It's really some of the most fascinating stuff you'll see, so I would definitely recommend you head over to twitch.tv/Bungie and check them out on February 26th starting at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Should be really good. But alright, with that being said, what do you say we jump into some of the big bits of news? First things first, we have got some absolutely massive changes coming to the Gambit game mode when the season of the Drifter begins on March 5th. This week we get to hear from Bungie senior designer Robbie Stevens about some quality of life improvements that are coming to everybody's favorite dredging-filled game mode. Let's go ahead and see what changes we're going to be getting. First things first, they've changed the third round of Gambit to a Primeval Rush Sudden Death. This will speed up Gambit matches overall and add a change of pace to the final round. Which is interesting. It seems like with this change, rather than getting a third round of Gambit that's just like the first and second round, but maybe with a few more majors and ultras thrown in, you're just thrown in against a Primeval boss, and whoever kills that Primeval first gets the win. Definitely an interesting way to speed things up there. They've also overhauled how they're going to choose the invader spawn location and increase the number of invader spawn points for each map. This should greatly reduce the chances of spawning very near or in direct line of sight of an enemy guardian. Now, this is where individuals like our own Nim Plays will really come into effect. I imagine this is a very Nim Plays change. For you Guardians out there who spend a lot of time in Gambit, you no doubt know exactly where the big main spawn locations are for invaders on each of the Gambit maps. And any dredgeon worth his salt will know to have those zones locked down the moment they see their opponents reaching 25 motes and then 50 motes, or when a Primeval has hit the field. And I think we've all had the experience of jumping through that portal ready to invade and then immediately being mapped by a Legend of Acreus, a tractor cannon, a Wardcliff coil, or somebody who had their Queenbreaker halfway raised. Simply because it becomes fairly easy to predict the spawn locations when you're paying attention in Gambit. So they're going to be changing that up to give invaders a bit more of an opportunity to actually fight. Interesting change. They've also implemented idle protection, which means that players that remain dormant for too long will not receive end-of-match rewards or infamy points. That's very interesting. I wonder if they're going to implement something like that for PvP. Depending on how strict this idle protection is, I don't know, I could see a couple of people starting to complain about that. We'll have to see. Next, the Triumph Light vs. Light can now be progressed by killing any Guardian using a super, not just invaders. This makes attaining the Dredgen title a little less daunting. After that, we've got some major changes coming to the blocker system. When this update goes into effect, a small blocker will now be a Taken Goblin with less health than the previous Taken Phalanx. Massive change. Medium blockers will now be a Taken Captain with more health than the previous Knight. And finally, large blockers will now be Taken Knights with more health than the previous Ogre. That's huge. I was not expecting blocker changes, which of course are the enemies, the Taken that you can summon to your opponent's side of the field when you deposit certain amounts of motes. I wasn't really expecting them to change those enemies, although I won't complain too much about some of it. Everyone knows that TBL hates Taken Phalanxes, and I for one will not miss the Taken Ogre's I-beam pushing me off the map or pushing me away from the boss. Lord knows, some of that could get a little bit scary when you're on some of the maps that have walk-offs and you get pushed off of a cliff. But all the same, I really wasn't expecting them to make any sort of change like that to the blocker system. Very interesting quality of life changes that are going to be coming to the Gambit game mode starting on March 5th when Season of the Drifter begins. But that's not the only thing that's happening with the Gambit game mode in the near future. Next week is going to be the final week of the Season of the Forge. And along with that, we're going to be having a triple infamy week starting on Tuesday, February 26th at 9 a.m. Pacific time and going until March 5th, 2019. So if you're looking to get some infamy points up, maybe you still got some things to chase for, next week is going to be your time to get it done. But alright, that's it for the big Gambit changes that we'll be getting. Next up, we've got some massive Sandbox changes, including some buffs, and yes, again, even some nerfs that we'll be seeing in the near future. This time, this developer commentary comes to us from Bungie Sandbox designer Victor Anderson, and they're going to be addressing a lot of big stuff. Let's dive into it. First up, linear fusion rifles. Linear fusion rifle aim assist values will receive an adjustment to reduce effectiveness at very long ranges. While Queenbreaker in particular has high aim assist values by default, we discovered an issue where it was not honoring aim assist values that applied to other linear fusion rifles of the same archetype. This resulted in Queenbreaker having over double the intended aim assist. As somebody who owns Queenbreaker, shoot, I would say any of you guys out there who own Queenbreaker, probably, can I get a big duh in chat? I think any of us who've used that gun could probably tell, yeah, this thing had a little bit more aim assist than was probably necessary. So now we know that there was a bug granting it double the amount of aim assist. They're going to be addressing this in the future. Linear fusion rifles will receive a 10% damage increase in PvE to compensate for the above changes. So basically, they're going to be lowering the aim assist value on linear fusion rifles as a whole, while also removing that bug on the Queenbreaker, but in order to compensate for this nerf, they're giving linear fusion rifles a 10% damage buff in PvE. Not too bad of a trade-off if you were to ask me. Next up, we've got some big changes coming to shotguns, and one big change that in particular I'm none too pleased with. They speak for a little bit about the nature of shotguns in PvE and PvP, and in particular how the rapid-fire frame archetype with full auto, how that archetype of shotguns is really dominating PvE right now. And so we're going to be seeing these changes in the future. 1. All shotguns will receive a damage multiplier in PvE activities, effectively doubling their damage. The Legend of Acreus is going to be the one exception to this. The full auto rate of fire bonus for shotguns is now going to be plus 10%, down from plus 100%. In addition, it no longer increases the shotgun pellet spread. This is a huge nerf to the rapid-fire frame shotguns. Yes, they're getting a damage increase, but remember, the rapid-fire frame, the way they worked right now is it essentially doubled the rate of fire of those shotguns, doubling their damage output by default. So now that rate of fire increase is being brought from a 100% rate of fire increase down to a 10% rate of fire increase. That is a 90% nerf for the full auto perk in and of itself, although I do believe when you work out the numbers here, it winds up being about a 30% decrease overall in rate of fire, with some of the other changes they're making to the archetype here, which either way is still a pretty heavy nerf. I can definitely agree that the full auto shotties were definitely the standard for PvE in that weapon class, but I kind of wish that we would have just gotten some of these buffs for the other shotgun classes rather than just the straight nerf to the rapid fire frame ones. Oh well, let's move on. The default rate of fire values have also been shifted for all shotguns. Aggressive frame shotguns have seen an RPM increase from 45 to 55, precisions from 55 RPM to 70 RPM, lightweights are 80 RPM, they were erroneously stated to be 90 RPM previously, and the rapid fire frame, the full auto shotties, have seen their RPM drop from 200 down to 140. Previously they were natively 100 rounds per minute, but due to the intrinsic full auto that was actually at 200, so now they're being knocked down to 140. Which is still much faster than the other archetype of shotguns, but of course nowhere near as fast as they used to be. They've also reduced the base damage for shotguns across the board to align with their new rates of fire on a per sub archetype basis. So the base damage for shotguns is going to be reduced to meet these new rates of fire, but shotguns are still receiving that damage multiplier buff in PvE. So judging from what these patch notes are telling us, shotguns should, after this update, be across the board a bit stronger in PvE than they are right now. Except for maybe, of course, the rapid fire ones. Anyways, additionally, ammo reserves for shotguns were reevaluated due to their increased efficiency of having more damage per shot. Finally, they also took the opportunity to slightly adjust shotguns for the Crucible. While shotguns will remain effective in the Crucible, they have toned down the range at which shotguns could secure a one-shot kill. So, shotguns are going to be a little bit less reliable in PvP when these changes go into effect. Alright, now, I'll be a little bit honest with you guys. I don't like some of these changes. I'm not a big fan of the nerf to the rapid-fire frame shotguns. Of course, they definitely were the best. This is stuff like the Icolo Shotty, the threat level from the Scourge of the Past raid. I kind of almost would have preferred that they just gave damage buffs and this PvE buff to the other archetype of shotguns, as well as the rate of fire buff to those archetypes while leaving the rapid fire frames alone, maybe just giving them the PvE damage multiplier. I know those things are definitely strong, but I'd prefer that we just make the other shotguns more viable as options for PvE, rather than lessening the viability of stuff like the Ikelos and the threat level. Also, not really sure how to feel about the range nerf in PvP. How big is it going to be? Is it going to be like a 1 meter range nerf, a 2 meter range nerf? I understand a lot of people are sick of the shotgun aping, but as a shotgun ape, ouch, that's my home. But anyways, the nerfs definitely aren't stopping there. One-Eyed Mask. This thing has been reigning as the supreme Titan exotic of choice in PvP for quite some time, and we're finally learning specifically about what they're going to be doing with the One-Eyed Mask in the future. Prepare yourselves, Titans. Changes are a-comin'. The duration of the Mark of Vengeance has been reduced from 15 seconds to 8 seconds. I think that's a pretty good change. I would actually be okay if that were the only change that they made to the One-Eyed Mask. But let's continue on. The way players refill health after a successful kill has changed. Before, it restored all of your health and the overshield refilled over time. Now, the health refills over time alongside the overshield. This should give a leg up when encountering situations where multiple people are fighting one person with the One-Eyed Mask equipped. Basically, this means when you get a kill, instead of your health immediately jumping back to 100% and then you starting to regenerate your shield immediately, the One-Eyed Mask is simply now going to start health regen, which means your health is going to start slowly going back up at the same time as your shield, rather than, again, getting your full health back instantly. Finally, Vengeance will no longer trigger for players in Super. This was making Supers far too potent. I can actually kind of agree with this last change. If you ran into a One-Eyed Mask Titan in their Super, they were darn near unkillable, which just further helped to make this thing a fantastic overall option in PvE and even PvP. We knew these nerfs were coming. Again, I would have argued that just changing the duration probably would have been more than enough if Bungie were willing to rebuff stuff like maybe Wormhusk Crown or something equivalent for the other classes. But we knew these changes were coming. We knew the nerf hammer was coming for the One-Eyed Mask eventually. And it looks like it's finally going to be hitting when Season of the Drifter goes live. But anyways, those changes will be coming alongside Destiny Update 2.2.0. We'll be covering that in more detail as we learn more about it in the future. But alright, Guardians, that is pretty much it for the biggest bits of news in this week's issue of the Bungie Weekly blog, This Week at Bungie. But there is one last thing that I wanted to talk about. We get to learn something very special at the end of this week's TWAB. This one is for all you hunters out there. Update 2.2.0 will make a slight change to your view when you're inspecting cloaks in the character screen. That's right, you're finally going to be able to see the entire cloak. This is something Guardians have been asking for the past 5 years, and I'm glad we're finally getting it in game. But alright, that is it for this one, Guardians. Those are my thoughts on all the big changes that will be coming alongside the Season of the Drifter in just a few weeks. Be sure to leave me your thoughts down in the comment section below. How do you feel about the Gambit changes? What about the Sandbox changes with linear fusion rifles, shotguns, and especially the One-Eyed Mask? Be sure to let me know down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like, make sure you subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest stuff we're putting out. That's going to be it for this one, Guardians. Thank you all so much for watching. And as always, I am the Black Link. You Guardians, stay frosty.